Jane Fonda and Robert Redford, two of Hollywood's most magnetic screen partners, spent decades circling each other in a way that was never just acting. From the moment they met, there was an ease between them, a spark that could light up an entire frame, yet always stopped just short of crossing into real life. Now, after years of silence, Jane has admitted something that reframes all those lingering glances and quiet pauses fans saw on screen. It was the mid-1960s, and Jane Fonda was already a name audiences recognized. She was Hollywood royalty, the daughter of Henry Fonda, and she carried both the privilege and pressure of that legacy. Robert Redford, meanwhile, was on the rise. He had the looks, the quiet charisma, and the kind of unshakable presence that made casting directors lean forward in their chairs. When their paths crossed for the first time, it wasn't in the glare of a premiere or at some carefully staged studio event. It was on a set, and even in those first moments, there was an ease between them that neither could explain. Redford had a calm, steady energy. Jane was quick, vibrant, and unafraid to challenge anyone in the room. Where some actors shrank under her intensity, Robert seemed to thrive in it. Their first project together was The Chase in 1966, though their screen time together was limited. Still, something shifted for both of them. Jane later admitted she felt an almost instant trust with Robert, rare for her, in an industry where appearances often hid motives. There was no pretense in the way he looked at her, no Hollywood veneer. He was present, he listened. And that made the difference. In those early years, Jane was still navigating the shadow of her famous father and the constant scrutiny over her choices, both personal and professional. Robert, on the other hand, was fiercely private, guarding his personal life with a quiet determination that made him even more intriguing. They didn't run in the same social circles, but every time they crossed paths, the conversation flowed, as if they'd seen each other the day before. Then came Barefoot in the Park in 1967, the film that would forever cement their pairing in Hollywood history. It wasn't just a romantic comedy. It was a cultural moment. The 60s were in full swing, and audiences were looking for stories that reflected the messiness of love with a new kind of honesty. Jane and Robert delivered exactly that. On screen, they were electric. Off screen, they were careful. Even then, there were whispers on the set. Crew members noticed the way Jane's laugh seemed a little lighter around Robert, and how Robert, usually so measured, couldn't hide the way his expression softened when he looked at her. They were both married to other people at the time, and both committed to maintaining professional boundaries. But that didn't stop the speculation. By the time Barefoot in the Park premiered, the world had fallen for their pairing. The charm, the banter, the lingering glances, it all felt so natural that audiences couldn't believe they weren't together in real life. For Jane and Robert, the experience was complicated. They had found something rare, but the timing, as it so often is in life, was impossible. Even in those early days, there was a shared understanding that whatever existed between them would have to live in the quiet spaces, in rehearsals, in the unscripted moments between takes, in the brief looks that said more than words ever could. It was the beginning of a professional partnership that would span decades, and a personal connection that would remain just out of reach. Because if those first films proved anything, it was that some sparks are too dangerous or too precious to risk turning into a flame. By the early 1970s, Jane Fonda and Robert Redford had secured their places among Hollywood's most bankable stars. Each had carved out a distinct identity: Jane as a fearless, politically engaged actress who refused to be boxed in, and Robert as the golden boy, whose understated charm drew audiences in without him ever seeming to ask for attention. Together, they became something else entirely, a pairing so natural that casting directors considered them a sure bet for romance-driven films. Their collaboration in Barefoot in the Park had been such a success that the industry expected, almost demanded, a repeat. But both Jane and Robert were careful. They chose their projects selectively, knowing that too many pairings could dilute the magic. It wasn't until years later that they would reunite for The Electric Horseman in 1979, a film that brought their chemistry into a new, more mature light. This was no wide-eyed newlywed comedy. Here, they played people who had lived through disappointment, who understood compromise, and who carried unspoken regrets. The flirtation between them was layered with restraint, the kind that comes from knowing exactly what's at stake if you let your guard down. On set, that energy translated into something so authentic that even veteran crew members commented on it. There was a comfort in the way they moved around each other, as if they shared an invisible history. Yet, there was also a tension, a line neither seemed willing to cross. Jane would later say that Robert had a way of keeping people at a certain distance, even those he liked. And Robert, for his part, was known for guarding his privacy with an almost stubborn persistence. Still, those who watched closely could see the small betrayals of that distance, a glance that lingered just a moment too long, a conversation that continued even after the cameras stopped rolling. In a business built on illusion, these moments felt real. So much so that audiences left theaters convinced there had to be more between them than either was admitting. For Jane, this period marked a turning point in her own life. She was navigating the collapse of her marriage to Tom Hayden, and her public image was being shaped as much by her activism as by her acting. Robert, meanwhile, was at the peak of his stardom, carrying the weight of being a leading man while also building his legacy behind the camera. It was here that the seeds of regret began to take root. Both were aware of the unique bond they shared, but both also seemed to understand that any move toward romance would come with risks to their friendship, their careers, and their ability to work together in the future. In some ways, that unspoken boundary became part of the appeal. Fans, however, weren't satisfied with boundaries. The public's fascination with Jane and Robert's pairing only grew with time. Interviews, red carpet appearances, even casual photographs of the two together became the subject of speculation. Yet neither offered more than polite acknowledgments of their friendship, letting the rumors swirl unchecked. But while the world was busy imagining them together, Jane and Robert were quietly living a story far more complicated than anyone guessed, one shaped as much by what they didn't say as by what they did. After The Electric Horseman, Jane Fonda and Robert Redford's paths began to diverge in ways that seemed almost fated. They didn't fall out. There was no dramatic rupture. Instead, life simply moved them in different directions. Directions that made those fleeting moments of closeness harder to come by. For Robert, the 1980s were consumed with both acting and the growing demands of the Sundance Institute, which he had founded to support independent filmmakers. The festival became a central part of his identity, one that kept him deeply involved in nurturing new talent. The role suited his reserved nature. It allowed him to champion stories without becoming the story himself. Jane, meanwhile, entered a period of reinvention. She was balancing her acting career with her activism, often under the intense scrutiny of a public that seemed as fascinated by her political stances as by her films. She was also navigating the complexities of her marriage to media mogul Ted Turner in later years, a relationship that, while significant, came with its own set of compromises. During this time, offers for the two to work together again did arise, but for one reason or another, the timing never aligned. Schedules conflicted. Projects fell through. Sometimes it was as simple as one of them being unavailable. Yet, behind those practical obstacles was something else, an unspoken hesitation. Both seemed to understand that another collaboration would inevitably revive all the speculation about what they really meant to each other. Privately, Jane would later admit that Robert's emotional reserve frustrated her. She admired his integrity, but she also recognized that it was a one she never quite managed to climb. For all the warmth they shared on set, there were always parts of him she couldn't reach. And perhaps, she realized, he intended it that way. Robert, on his side, was aware of Jane's dynamism, her openness, and her ability to command a room. It was part of what drew him to her in the first place, but it was also what made him cautious. A relationship between them would not have been a quiet one, not in the public eye, and Robert was a man who valued quiet above almost everything. As the years passed, each experienced other relationships, other heartbreaks, other victories. Yet every time their names came up together, whether in an interview, a retrospective, or a fan's wishful musing, there was a flicker of something unfinished. The kind of connection that doesn't fade, even when life insists you move on. When they did meet occasionally at industry events, there was no awkwardness. They would fall back into the easy rapport that had defined their earliest days. But those meetings were fleeting, and each time they parted, it seemed to carry the weight of another missed opportunity. What neither of them could have predicted was that, decades later, they would find themselves face to face again, older, wiser, and finally ready to confront what had been left unsaid all those years before. It was 2017 when Jane Fonda and Robert Redford stepped onto a set together for the first time in nearly 40 years. The film was Our Souls at Night, based on a quiet, intimate novel about two widowed neighbors who form a late-in-life companionship. The roles could not have been more fitting, two people with long histories, carrying the weight of everything they'd lived through, finally finding comfort in each other's presence. From the moment cameras rolled, it was clear the spark was still there. Time had not diminished it. If anything, the years had given it depth. Jane later reflected on how easy it was to work with Robert again, how no rehearsal could replicate the natural rhythm they shared. Yet beneath the ease was a layer of vulnerability that neither had shown in their earlier work. They were no longer playing young lovers. They were portraying people who understood loss, compromise, and the way love can arrive late in life and still matter. In the lead-up to the film's release, Jane gave a series of interviews in which she spoke more candidly than ever about Robert. She called him her favorite leading man, praised his talent, and admitted something that surprised even longtime fans. She had been in love with him, in her own way, for decades. Not a constant, consuming love, but the kind that lives quietly in the background, never acted upon, yet never fading. She also revealed a truth that reframed their entire history. Part of the reason they never pursued anything off-screen was Robert's emotional distance. She respected it, even understood it, but it had always left her wondering what might have been if he had been willing to let that guard down. And she didn't shy away from acknowledging her own choices, marriages, activism, career moves that kept them from ever being in the right place at the right time. Robert, for his part, didn't offer a dramatic confession in return. True to form, he spoke warmly of Jane, admired her work, and emphasized the trust they shared. But in his quiet, measured way, he acknowledged that they had always been close, and that the comfort they felt on set came from decades of mutual respect. For fans, Jane's admission was both thrilling and bittersweet. It confirmed what so many had suspected when watching Barefoot in the Park or The Electric Horseman, that there was something real between them, even if it never crossed the line into romance. But it also underscored the poignancy of missed opportunities. On the set of Our Souls at Night, there were moments between takes when Jane and Robert would simply sit together. No cameras rolling, no audience watching. They didn't need to fill the silence. After all those years, the silence said enough. Yet what Jane revealed next, about the one thing she wishes she had told Robert decades earlier, would leave even the most devoted fans caught between joy and heartbreak. When Jane Fonda finally spoke openly about her decades-long bond with Robert Redford, she didn't frame it as a confession. It wasn't designed to shock or to stir headlines. Instead, it felt like the kind of truth a person only allows themselves to say when enough years have passed, when time has softened the edges of regret. She explained that there had always been one thing she never told Robert, though she thought about it often. It wasn't a declaration of love in the grand cinematic sense. It was simpler, quieter, yet no less profound. She wished she had told him how safe she felt around him. How, in an industry built on competition, ego, and performance, he had been a constant, a man who never diminished her light, who let her be fully herself. In her words, that kind of safety was rare, and perhaps it was the very reason she'd never wanted to risk changing what they had. Still, she admitted, there were nights when she wondered what might have happened if she had been braver, or if he had been more willing to let someone in. Robert's reaction to her admission was as understated as fans might expect. He didn't offer a sweeping romantic response or rewrite their shared history. But there was a warmth in his eyes when he spoke of Jane. A recognition that what they had shared, whatever it was, whatever it wasn't, had endured longer than many real relationships. For audiences who had followed them from the carefree days of Barefoot in the park to the reflective intimacy of Our Souls at Night, Jane's words felt like both a gift and a gentle ache. They validated the years of speculation about their closeness, yet they also confirmed that some connections remain just out of reach, no matter how deep the bond. Jane herself seemed at peace with it. At this stage of her life, she could look back without bitterness. She and Robert had given each other something that didn't require a label, something that survived decades without being defined by romance. But her candor about what she never said about the safety, the trust, the unspoken affection, revealed just how much those unsaid words can linger, even after a lifetime. For many fans, her admission added a new layer to every scene they ever shared. The glances seemed heavier, the silences between lines seemed longer, the laughter felt more personal. It was as if the truth had been hiding in plain sight all along, waiting for her to finally give it a voice. And with that, Jane Fonda had not only rewritten her own story with Robert Redford, she had given fans a bittersweet reminder that the most lasting love stories aren't always the ones that unfold the way we expect. Jane Fonda and Robert Redford's story was never about grand gestures or public declarations. It was written in glances across a crowded set, in conversations that ended before they gave too much away, in the way each seemed to soften in the other's presence. For over half a century, they carried a connection that was as enduring as it was undefined. What Jane finally admitted didn't change their history. It didn't turn their story into a romance or rewrite the choices they made. But it did pull back the curtain on a truth fans had always suspected, that beneath the professionalism, beneath the distance, there was an affection that had quietly shaped both of their lives. In the end, they remained what they had always been: trusted collaborators, dear friends, and living proof that not every love story needs to follow the script to matter. Sometimes, the relationships that leave the deepest mark are the ones that exist in the spaces between words. As Jane herself has acknowledged, those unsaid things, the moments they never acted on, are part of what made their bond last. And perhaps that's why fans feel such a pull toward their story even now. It's a reminder that life is full of almosts and what-ifs, and that those can be just as powerful as the things we choose. For Jane and Robert, the legacy isn't just in the films they made, but in the story their faces told without ever speaking it aloud. For more emotional stories, check out this video.